Picture your DNA as an instruction manual. Every one of your 50 trillion cells encompasses this instruction manual and reads the relevant pages to do jobs it needs to do. And if the instruction isn't written properly,
Hey folks, just a quick reminder to make sure that you like and that you subscribe, hit that notification bell, get the algorithms fired up so that you will in fact get more great content just like this, and so that I can attract more amazing guests like Kashif Khan. Listen in, enjoy. Kashif Khan, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
pleasure. It's awesome to be here with you.
Kashif, is that generally I open with my guests, the fact that their bios never seem to do justice. And so I often say, well, for listeners, when somebody walks up and says, so Kashif, what do you do? What's your answer? But I'm going to change it up. Excuse me. I'm going to change it up today because, in the bio that I received, there's a thing here that says, I want to read this. Between genetic coaching, which is revolutionizing personalized parenting through DNA testing, and the White Bottle Project, which leverages the latest advancement and functional genomics to offer personalized supplement solutions for children, Cash is pioneering the way for parents to feel empowered and equipped with a roadmap and tools to support their kids to thrive. And I went, and then there's another statement in here, and fueling Kashif's passion to support more parenting in decoding their children's genetic blueprints. I went, holy shit, this is like, what the hell are we talking about here today, Kashif? And so I was fascinated by all of that. So back to your, I guess maybe the question is, so when people ask you, what do you do? What's your answer to that question, given the highlights of that bio?
Yeah, it takes a while to answer. That's the problem. There's a lot going on, as you know. And the way you talked about in terms of parenting is more so taking the science and all of what we learned and applying it to a place where we really know what's needed. Meaning, if I can predict through your human genome disease risk, and not only risk, but the reason, meaning that there's action and you know what to do about it, well, then the earlier you start, the better. And so, whereas in our research, we spent 3 years with 7,000 patients with the genome in one hand and everything about their nutrition, lifestyle, their habits, their healthcare records in another hand, trying to figure out why they got sick. And we then unraveled really complicated cases like Lyme disease, women that are struggling with menopause, can't get things kept at bay, people with autoimmune conditions. And we kept finding that there actually is a root. And the root usually has to do with some broken biology, some genetic instruction that just isn't working. So picture your DNA as an instruction manual. Every one of your 50 trillion cells encompasses this instruction manual and reads the relevant pages to do jobs it needs to do. And if the instruction isn't written properly, the heart cell doesn't know how to be a proper heart cell. The kidney cell doesn't know how to do its job. You don't make hormones properly. You don't clear toxins properly. So if I can read the book and I know what pages are missing and what paragraphs are incorrect, what's misspelt improperly, I know what your body's doing wrong. And I therefore know what I need to add, what I need to delete, and disease becomes optional.
So this, in what I'm hearing, and just to keep it really simple for me, is that if I'm kind of interpreting what you just said, it would be like the software in a system that there's a glitch maybe in the software. The intention of the software is this, but somewhere along the line, maybe when you're uploading that software, there's a glitch. Something caused a glitch in the software, so it's not fully doing what it's intended to do. Therefore, we have to get in and troubleshoot, kind of trace it back to what is the issue with that software, and then put in some kind of correction or figure out what, or if there is a correction that can be put in. Would that be kind of a way to describe it?
Exactly.
Okay,
And let me give you an example to your point. In my software, which wasn't really written properly. So how did I get down the journey? I was actually pretty sick. I had never really been to a doctor, didn't have health concerns. And a few years ago, it was like hitting a brick wall, all of a sudden everything all at once. And so my question to these multiple doctors with multiple pills, what did I do? Like this that can't be a coincidence. The serendipity of like 5 chronic diseases all at the same time. What happened? And the answer I kind of got, if I paraphrase, was we don't do that here. It's like we diagnose, we prescribe, and we manage, but we don't ask why. That's what drove me down this sort of rabbit hole of figuring out why. And one big aha moment for me was just like you said about the software, there's a line of code you're supposed to have called GSTM1. GSTM1 drives glutathione activity in your gut. And glutathione is an antioxidant. So when we eat, along with the food, we take in pesticides, chemicals, packaging, preservatives, things that are not meant to be part of our bloodstream, our organs, etc. And
Hmm.
there's an assumption that we filter those things out, pee them, poop them, sweat them, right? This
Hmm.
code, GSTM1, I don't even have. It's literally blank. It's missing from my genetic code. So no wonder that I would go to lunches with my business partner and he would have no issue and I would struggle and have to go home. Because the same thing that was not a problem for him that Health Canada approved as clean and clear meant a lot to me because I have zero first line of defense to block it from causing me inflammation. So that became a big aha moment in terms of what do I prioritize and what do my habits look like.
So, Cash, when you look at what you went through and they don't ask the question why, how did you get to and why? How did you determine that this is what was in fact happening for you? That there was some kind of, you know, software glitch, if you will, if we use that kind of thought process. How did you get to that understanding? That is it because of your own background that you figured it out, or what led you down the path going, I have to figure out why this is happening?
Yes, when you find most, let's say, great functional medicine stories, they kind of come from the same place where I was struggling. I needed answers, couldn't get the answers. I knew that the answers were getting couldn't be the only answer. There must be more. And so people start self discovery outside of their conventional allopathic medical office. And you'll see a lot of people where I was struggling for Lyme disease for 5 years. I cured myself. I was still dealing with mold toxicity. I didn't know that's why I felt so bad and I had depression. It was actually mold. So because we have a medical system that's really good at acute care, break your arm, stage 4, something, deal with the emergency, great. That same toolkit is used for chronic disease management, which is reply and react to a red warning sign of a symptom as opposed to asking, why did it happen? Functional medicine is why did it happen? Root cause. And so I had to do that myself. I didn't come from the space. I didn't have a PhD. I wasn't, in fact, prior to this, I rarely went to a doctor's office, right? And
Right.
so explored traditional Chinese medicine. I explored chiropractic. I explored homeopathy, naturopathy. And it wasn't until I discovered deep biology, human genetics, the gut microbiome, things that were measurable, that I started to get empirical data like this is actually broken. There's no guesswork. There's no trial and error. Your unique answer is this. There's an instruction that just doesn't work. And you need to fortify the biology here. And that's that central hub of a biological failure. And then all the spokes of all these symptoms go away. There are years and years of your body struggling, trying to resist the symptom, but eventually loses the battle. And that's what happened to me. 5 chronic diseases, 5 medications, gone.
So when you consider this, I mean, this sounds pretty groundbreaking. Now, when you use the example of Lyme disease, is that the case for anybody that has Lyme disease, or is it very specific to each patient? How like because when you look at it and you go, okay, well, you had 5 different things going on for you, you bust through all of them and you got it handled and figured out. So first off, does it apply right across the board or is it unique to each patient?
So the vast majority of our healthcare spend is on chronic disease management. In fact, the actual number is 90%. So 10% is on rare genetic conditions and acute care. And those rare genetic conditions, you have them. There's a genetic code that's broken that directly causes it. But the vast majority of what we struggle with, the big problems, were not innate. You're not born with them. They're caused from your habits, environment, nutrition, lifestyle on top of broken biology equals the problem. You have to do something wrong. Usually not your own fault, unknowingly, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to Lyme disease, as an example, we participated in what we think is Canada's largest Lyme study. I haven't heard of anything bigger, where we went through 800 Lyme patients to understand why do some of them not even know that they're sick? Why do some of them have a basic flu and then they recover? And why are some bedridden for months? The same bacteria entering the same human species, why the different outcome? And what we found was their unique genetics led to a different outcome, because what does Lyme do? It causes inflammation, and your body has different levels of response to fight that inflammation. And genetically, if you're not wired to fight the inflammation, it's going to linger and you're going to struggle. So, as opposed to dealing with the Lyme itself, you need to deal with the body's ability to already deal with that bacteria. The body's resilient, it rejuvenates, it repairs. There's certain broken code, so certain threats mean more to certain people. The really mind-blowing thing that came out of that study was when it came to the women that were in this study,
Mhm.
we found that 26% of them didn't even have Lyme. Now, keep in mind that this is a bunch of clinics that put together a bunch of Lyme patients, handed them over to us, said, let's go study and figure out what's really going on, why the variable outcome. And we had to come back and say, thank you for the diagnosis. It was wrong. These women actually made a toxic estrogen. So, estrogen is a female sex hormone, men make
Yep.
it too. And they made a
Yep.
version of it that caused inflammation that led to the exact same symptoms as Lyme. So, they were misdiagnosed. And it's no surprise that the number three cause of death in the United States is medical error, literally. Doctors making mistakes because they have to reply to symptoms. So, yeah, so any chronic disease can be unraveled at the biologic level, and you can understand what to actually do at the root cause to thrive through it.
So when you look at something, for example, like dementia or Alzheimer's, which is a big topic now, and I think that
Yeah.
has a lot to do with just the fact that boomers are aging and a lot of those things are happening, and boomers' parents, of course.
Yep.
Now, would that apply for something like that? Because there's often talk about certain aspects of lifestyle that contribute to dementia or Alzheimer's, or there's a risk of it because of that. Is that something that falls within your plate of research and the work that you're doing?
Definitely. I literally just a week ago hosted an entire masterclass and workshop on Alzheimer's and dementia. And the
Hmm.
first thing I told the people, there was literally hundreds of people that either had a family member or they were interested in prevention, just knowing how to not go there, right? And so the first thing I told them is, let's stop calling it Alzheimer's and dementia as if it's a disease that's coming. Let's stop saying my mom had it, my grandma had it. We got to understand that if mom had it or grandma had it, then it's a priority. It's not a prescription. So there was a show on Netflix a couple years ago called Limitless that was hosted by Chris Hemsworth, Thor, right? So Thor, Chris Hemsworth hosted the show, and one of
Yeah.
the episodes, he was told that based on the ApoE gene, which is referred to as the Alzheimer's gene, that he has an elevated risk of dementia. Based on this gene, if you have a certain version, you're told you have a no risk of dementia. Another version, you have an 8 to 10 times elevated risk, and another version, you have a 17 to 25 times risk. Now, if I
Right.
ask any of the scientists to tell people that, what does that gene do? There's nowhere in that answer that it causes dementia. What it does, it's responsible for the movement of lipids, cholesterol in your body. So it's responsible for the efficiency in which you transport lipids in your body. So
Hmm.
how does that get us into this dementia path? And this gives us a sort of, so if somebody came to me saying I had one of those two bad versions, and we did, by the way, consult the Chris Hemsworth show. I was back and forth with the producers, telling them how to work on things genetically and how to interpret it. They didn't use any of that because there was no drama for the TV show. We actually solved the problem, which they didn't want, right? So going back to it, if you're told this, then you know you don't transport lipids efficiently. If you have inflammation in your brain, your body will deploy cholesterol to your brain as a hormone to fight the inflammation. That's why it's sent there. Something caused the inflammation, usually some form of a toxin.
Yeah.
Toxin causes the inflammation, cholesterol is sent. The same toxin that causes inflammation in the brain also oxidizes the cholesterol, and now the cholesterol starts to build up because it's been damaged. And if you have the bad ApoE gene, you don't do a good job of movement of that cholesterol. So you start to build what's called an amyloid plaque in your brain. And that plaque chokes at the brain cells, kills brain cells, and eventually leads to a condition you might call dementia. right? So
Mhm.
my question is, why was the brain inflamed? Isn't that the first step? Right before the cholesterol only went there to fix a problem. The cholesterol wasn't the problem in itself. So that ApoE gene shouldn't be part of the equation. We know why the brain gets inflamed. There's a gentleman named Dr. Tom O'Brien who's a pioneer of the functional medicine sort of movement, and he said that in California, where he is, 66% of dementia is inhalation based on what people are breathing because the air is so polluted. And we are genetically wired for a certain level of pollution, but it's gone far beyond that. So much getting in, causing inflammation in the brain. And now genetically, we filter at different levels, so it may mean more to certain people. In Canada, where you and I are, Health Canada refers to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, meaning that it's a
Mm.
metabolic issue because the vast majority of Canadian dementia is based on I ate too much sugar. And I could have got the standard conventional diabetes we know, or I could have got inflammation in my brain that led to this plaque issue, right? Two of five. Number three is stress and cortisol. If you're in chronic stress and anxiety and trauma, for example, where trauma, your body gets stuck in a fight or flight and it won't actually heal. It wants to go to battle and thinks that that's what you're doing instead of rejuvenating. That cortisol, an elevated hormone, can cause brain inflammation, which then leads to this trigger of the cholesterol. Then there's what you're eating in terms of causing damage to the gut itself. So me, remember I said I'm missing that GSTM1 gene, so I have no protection to my gut. So for me,
Yeah.
the gut lining getting disrupted, leading to what we call leaky gut. The
Yeah.
toxin can then leak through your gut wall, which becomes permeable directly into your bloodstream, crossing the blood-brain barrier, causing brain inflammation. So from people, it's their leaky gut that causes it. And the last one, and this is why 80% of dementia cases are in women. The research dollars all go on studying male cases, but the cases are mostly in women because hormones that you make can cause inflammation. And women, some women, are genetically wired to produce excess estrogen metabolites, which are highly inflammatory, and those can cause inflammation to the brain. Right? So now you have these five buckets of root cause, and that's what I meant by functional thinking. Science is this gene causes Alzheimer's. If you see a marker, you're going to get, and it's true, the correlation is there, but it doesn't tell you what to do. And in that episode with Chris Hemsworth, he was just kind of walking around, looking out into the sky, saying, "Am I going to be able to recognize my grandchildren?" That's what he was left with. Like, here you go, good luck. Let's see what happens. Versus, let's go look at these five things, find the root cause, and just make sure you never have inflammation in your brain. It's a priority, not a prescription.
So as I'm kind of listening to what you're describing, and there's of course a number of things that fall into that. Something that showed up for me is I believe you're on Tom Bilyeu podcast, and we're discussing this kind of topic and having a conversation with Tom, and only because I follow Tom, he's very entrenched in this whole thought process about the gut and the
Yeah.
impact of the gut and the understanding. And there was a book some time ago that I read, and this is many years ago, called The Second Brain. I think that was the title
Yeah.
of the book, The Second Brain, being about the gut. And so what I'm hearing, and I'm not saying this is what I'm hearing, how I'm hearing this is that when we look at all of these, stories that we're tell ourselves because of what the system is today and what medical kind of science has said to us, is that we believe in many cases that we have a genetic predisposition to be this way. Back to your point, grandma had it, grandpa had it, whatever the story is, it runs in the family. And so, but what I'm hearing you say is that much of this can be tracked back to just how our diet, as an example, what's going
Mhm.
on in our body. And although we may have a out of sync software running in our system, most of that we can work around given those kinds of considerations, diet, that kind of stuff. Our medical system right now is read, react, not why. It's, in other words, okay, well, we'll give you a drug for this. It's kind of that we've got a drug that will fix this or hide the symptoms or cure you or whatever the story might be. And what you're saying and what I'm hearing you say is that no, we have to step back from that and ask the question of why. And more you're finding is that in your research and in what the work that you've done a lot of over the years is that it could be it's a software disruption, I'll use that language for lack of better things, and that can in fact either work around or a correction put in. So if I recap that, okay.
Yeah, right on, because that's exactly it. Find out the broken code, right? It's not about waiting for what's coming. It's why would it come? Like, what am I doing that would I wasn't born with dementia.
Yeah.
People don't get dementia in their 20s for the most part. By the time you get to 50, 55, the average North American gets their first chronic disease at 55 and two by 65. That's unfortunately the current story. The last 15 years of life are spent in treatment. That's
Hmm.
literally the average today. It's worse in the United States than it is in Canada, but it's around there. So all of that is based on the assumption that disease comes with aging, and we just accept it. It's part of
Hmm.
the aging process. So why does it come with aging? Did we not ask what about aging causes that? Well, the same inflammatory insult that you were fighting in your youth eventually crosses a threshold where the inflammation wins. Why? In your cells, there's something called mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy production center of the cell. Every one of your 50 trillion cells has one. Uh, as you age, they deplete. They shrink in size, they reduce in number, they're not as potent. So you were having this Alzheimer's disease your whole life, but you were keeping it at bay because you had the cellular energy to fight the inflammation. You had the cellular energy to push the toxins out. You had the cellular energy to manage the metabolic dysfunction caused by the diet. Then all of a sudden, the energy level drops and the disease and inflammation win. And that's why it usually hits around 55. So there's things to do: maintaining the health of the cell, removing all the toxins that cause inflammation, and then knowing based on your unique genetic wiring what is the priority. You don't need to do everything. And this is where we
Hmm.
struggle. You watch these biohackers online that take literally Dave Asprey takes 120 supplements a day.
Yeah.
120 supplements a day. Brian Johnson spends $2 million a year to live longer.
Yeah.
If you knew what the actual threat was, you wouldn't need to do any of that. It's you could make some very expensive pee by taking 120 supplements a day, right? Because most of it your body's not using if you didn't need it. But the things you actually need, your body really wants and will utilize. So
Hmm.
and then you would ask, like, why does the body even have these unique traits and variable outcomes in your genome? Well, the same thing, and this will, if I were to say one thing, context is the key. It's all about context. Why do I say that? So the same thing that I said, the ApoE gene that causes cholesterol to go to your brain as a result of inflammation, used to be, which is now considered the bad version of the gene, used to be the good version of the gene. Why? Because our ancestors didn't have chronic inflammatory insults like pollution and bad food, etc. Everything was good. And then once in a while, they went to battle. Once in a while, they dropped a hammer on their foot, and the person that could actually deploy cholesterol effectively and fight the inflammation fast would survive. So what used to be a survival gene, the person that I would actually win in an ancestral context, which hasn't changed, same genetics, now becomes a chronic disease causing gene because your context has changed. The inputs have changed, which brings me back to, if you knew your genome and you just had the right inputs, chronic disease becomes optional.
So what I love about what you're saying, and again, I want to just really, for me, have to keep it simple, is that there's a lot of science that is behind all of this. I mean, in what you've learned and the testing and all the things that you do, but what we're looking at is a very naturopathic or very holistic way of staying healthy. And that's through management of diet, management of stress, probably maybe some supplements that need to fit into that category depending on what you've got going on. And I use myself as a bit of an example in this, Cash, because health has always been my one of my highest values, staying healthy. And I lost two sisters to cancer. Both of them passed before they were 60. I'm 66, but I've always had, there was a fundamental, and I'll just share a quick story with you. Years ago, somebody said that when we look at our stress levels, for example, and or our thought processes, that our physicalness is a manifestation often of how we think, of how we carry stress, of and then they and I remember specifically, and they gave an example which was really straightforward. They go, if you don't believe that our physical what's happening to us physically is some form of a manifestation of how we think or the stress that we carry, how we operate, our operating system, how we see life, consider an ulcer. An
Yeah.
ulcer is a physical manifestation of anxiety, stress, and all the rest of it. And in that moment, I I bought into it. Like, in other words, so I've lived really my life a couple of different ways. Number one, managing my diet. Number two, managing my stress, and number three, being aware of my thought processes. And I think I've lived a pretty healthy lifestyle. I don't get sick. I can't even remember the last time I had a cold. I can't even recall if I've had sick days over the past 20 plus years. So my point is that I really understand that aspect of it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that when you consider, and I guess it's not to negate the medical profession in terms of pharmacare, but really what you're saying is we need to step back and really consider that, based on where we are today and on what we know now, is that there's more proof that's saying no, you need to look at it and go back to why, and then understand what changes you have to make in your lifestyle, in your environment, maybe even your thought process. Is that a fair statement? That's kind of how maybe that's how I'm hoping to hear it. But is that
Yeah.
in fact the case, Cash?
You're right on. Health is your habits, right? Health is nutrition, environment, lifestyle. And I guess all I'm saying is that there's some hyper personalization and bio individuality needed there, where the
Hmm.
same answer isn't true for everybody. That's where people get stuck. Like, I
Hmm.
am eating right. Why can't I lose weight? I am exercising. Why can't I lose weight? Those types of comments. And that's where
Hmm.
there's some unique nuance in the genome that needs you to do something different. And if I use an example of, we work on a lot of professional athletes. So I'm in Toronto. It's the mecca of NHL hockey training. So I work on a lot of NHL players, right?
Hmm.
And so what we learned was, I'm exercising, I'm eating, all best coaches, best trainers, best everything. Why are some of these athletes getting cholesterol issues in their 30s when they should have been, like, they have the best of everything, right? The
Good
holistic thinking,
question.
like, right? And
Yeah.
why do you see these soccer players drop dead at 35 on the field? Heart failure. Why do you see these
Hmm.
Olympic sprinters drop dead at 35? Why is it in their mid 30s that all of a sudden things go wrong when they are in their perfect and prime shape? So
Hmm.
just like I said about the brain, the same thing happens with your cardiovascular system, where your body will deploy cholesterol and build a plaque if there's inflammation. But the actual physical hardware of the arteries around the heart, they vary in quality depending on your genetics. So if I have your DNA, I can tell you, do you have resilient and, stainless steel arteries that can take a beating, or do you have paper thin arteries that can get inflamed pretty easily, which will lead to a plaque buildup because your body will use cholesterol to fix it. So this goes back to what you were talking about. And when you think about, okay, I'm going to start, I'm going to go exercise, I'm going to get on the treadmill. That
Hmm.
treadmill may be the thing that makes you sick. Because if you do
Yeah.
have paper thin arteries, the not so good quality, and you're into what we call oxidative stress, taking in a lot of oxygen, and you don't have the genetic ability to filter those oxidants. So every time you breathe, you take in oxygen, your mitochondria converts that into energy, and it makes something called an oxidant, which is the smoke of burning the fuel, right? And those oxidants are meant to be cleared genetically. Some people don't clear them. So now you have
Hmm.
that soccer player who's running, 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 training, 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 running, 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 training, 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 in oxidative stress all the time without the genetic ability to clear the oxidants, which some people don't do, with the bad hardware cardiovascularly causing inflammation. And all of a sudden, nobody for a prime soccer player in their late 20s is checking for cardiovascular disease. And 32, 33, they collapse of heart failure. So, this extreme, why do I bring this up? Because you are absolutely correct. Your habits will define your health if you want to maintain health as opposed to fight disease, but they're not always obvious. There's certain things that you think are correct. And if I can speak about diet, I'll give you another example. A lot of people today are choosing to eat a vegan diet because it's clean and it's good for the cardiovascular system, etc., things of that nature. And for
Yes.
some people, we see them thrive. For some people, we see this is the cause of the chronic disease they have. So I did the work, I put in the effort, I made a choice, and I strictly followed the plan, but I still got sick. Why? The enzymes required to break down plant proteins, beans, lentils, chickpeas, legumes, variable in how we produce them genetically.
Hmm.
The enzymes required to break down green plants, kale, broccoli, spinach, different how we do them. The gut lining and what is designed to handle in terms of food input, different for different people. Your body's ability to turn starch and carbs into fuel. Vegan diets tend to be heavy on the carb side, also highly variable. The insulin response and how your body handles insulin, genetically highly variable. So if I have your DNA, I can tell you if by choosing the vegan diet, you're going to thrive and feel incredible, or you're going to
Yeah.
slowly get sick over time. So yes to what you're saying. Now let's take that decision I'm going to make this a priority. I'm going to do the right stuff. What does that mean? What is the right
Hmm.
stuff? That's where there's bio individuality needed.
So, what do we do in the environment that we are today? I mean, let's face it, our medical system is wired to drug us to generally, and I don't want to speak for all docs out there, but I mean, ultimately, it really is a read and react kind of scenario. Being preventative is not really the operating system of our medical system. I don't think anywhere in North America. You're looking at a very holistic approach. So, what does somebody do that listens to this podcast and has something going on? Do they then break it down and go, okay, like the I'm wired personally, and this is why this topic is so fascinating for me and why I've got such a high interest in it. Because if I'm feeling out of whack in those occasions when I have gotten sick where I'm not feeling well, the first thing I do is I'm going, what's going on for me? I ask the question, what is going on for me? If I go up and I have a big night of eating too much, I wake up with a food hangover. Like, there are
Yeah.
certain aspects of I always take responsibility for whatever is physically manifesting for me. I mean, short of getting hit by a car, right? You know what I'm saying? So the point of it is that what does somebody do that's listening to this that has something going on, and how, because you're in Toronto, what does somebody do that's in, Punachai, Saskatchewan? You know what I'm saying? How do we do we self-diagnose? How do we handle these situations, Cash?
Yeah, there's two answers. One is like, how do you do what do you do if you don't have access? I'll answer that. And the second thing is, how do people do what I'm talking about? It's global. So we have patients and clients literally all over the world,
Okay,
right?
great.
That's the beauty of the world we now live in as much as COVID wrecked things, it also created a new reality where look what we're doing right now, where you're
Technology.
right.
Yeah.
So I've never met the vast majority of the thousands of people that we've helped because it's all online, right? So it's testing your DNA is literally sending a saliva sample in the mail. It's so easy now. It used to
Right.
be going to clinic, drawing blood, having to wait there, and now it's like ship you a kit, spit in a tube, ship it back. A few weeks later, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of line of code telling you exactly how you were designed, and brilliant people that know how to read it and tell you what it means, right? So in terms of, I'll let you know like how to reach us and how to do that, but
Yeah.
that's answer number one, which is like this is the one thing that I don't understand why Health Canada or the FDA doesn't say that every single citizen needs their DNA sequenced as step one to healthcare. Because why should we ever make a mistake? Why should we trial and error? Why shouldn't anyone just know exactly how their body is designed and know what to do? And that's why I speak about children so much, because the earlier we start, the better off the outcome is going to be. So step one, DNA sequenced. I now know exactly what to prioritize and focus. I know what choices to make. I can see what's coming in the future because my DNA is telling me, and I can now take a detour. It's like this GPS for health that will allow me to go in a different direction and avoid that calamity. And I also now know the things that I'm struggling with. Why did they happen? What broken biology plus my habits in combination led to the way I feel? And if I now know that, forget about the pill. I'm going to start working on the root cause and eliminate the reason it happened. And the
Mm.
body will regenerate. The body will heal. The body is designed to heal if you get rid of the threat. There's no such thing as detox if you don't get rid of the tox, right? You got to get rid of the source and then heal. So now the second answer is, if somebody doesn't have access to DNA, doesn't want, like, okay, don't want to do it, don't understand it, nowhere near it, whatever.
Yeah.
We need to know that the reality that we're in, 2024, things have changed. It's no longer grandma's healthcare system of I can go do whatever I want, and when I break something, it's the doctor's job to fix me. That doesn't work anymore. There's no such thing as sometimes people get sick. 60% of North American children now have a chronic disease. When you and I were in school, a child with a chronic disease was a very rare thing. It's
Yes.
now the majority, 60%, right? So the children haven't changed. You know, 3 generations ago, 1 in 10,000 children was autistic. 2 generations ago, 1 in 500. Now the Center for Disease Control says it's 1 in 36. You know, how do those numbers, where did that come from? It didn't come from because the children changed. It came from the environment changing. It came from 144,000 chemicals being added to humanity since the 1970s. It came from our food changing. It came from, there's a study that just came out of Holland last month that says that indoor air quality in North American homes is now 4 to 5 times worse outdoor. We used to come home to escape this pollution. Now, between your fabric softener, laundry detergent, dry cleaning, cosmetics, sunscreen, perfumes, etc., all the fragrances and chemicals that are trapped in this drywall box are overburdening your ability to detoxify them. So just knowing that all of what you're now dealing with, take any one of them as a single siloed thing, and the medical research is true, it won't hurt you. Put them all together in the practical reality of how you actually live, it is far too much. So step one is get it out, purge, know what the threats are. You know, between your cosmetics, between your personal care products, between the off gassing of your brand new furniture and the new car smell, and one of those things stand alone, no problem. There's too many of those things all at time, all in one human form, causing too much inflammation. So I would go there and clean things up, like what you've done for yourself, right? But to know where to prioritize, because most people can't do everything. Most people can't live the lives. Their kids, their family, their mom won't allow them to eat clean, right? It's like,
Hmm.
no, it's Christmas dinner. You got to do what we're doing. So at least being able to prioritize, and that's what your DNA will do for you. And I can share a link on where to get that done if you want to truly know at a unique individual level.
Yeah, 100%. Would love for you to share that link and understand it. So, you had an experience with your own children, and you want to
Yeah.
share a little bit about that insight in terms of what, and I'm assuming that that's also what drove some of, what opened up a door even wider for you to go, I got to go down this path and I got to check into it, because you did have an experience with one of your kids or all your kids in terms of just their learning and where they were being blocked. Is that am I got
Yeah.
that, I think, in your bio. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where, it took me from, this is you when we think of health and wellness, we think of it as an adult activity, right? Unless a child has an issue like asthma, autism, skin issues, which are the big ones, there's nothing done about children's wellness and prevention.
Mhm.
But I realize that's the most powerful place to apply this, because you start early and then you set somebody on a path, the trajectory changes. Imagine 20 years down the road where they end up when you switch the trajectory just a few degrees, right? So I'll start by telling you about my niece, which really would encompass how you go from genetics to functional genomics. And she is the reason why we went from being a research company, which was studying the human genome, to teach clinics, hospitals, etc., what they need to know, to actually this epiphany of what everyone needs this. And we became a consumer company selling tests to the directly to the public. That wasn't happening on day one. So
Mhm.
my mother, my niece, and my sister live together. And my mother called me saying, "Your niece can't breathe. Get over here." So we live 10 minutes apart. I got there to help them out, and to me, it looked like an anxiety attack. So I called a friend who's a pediatrician. He's also one of our investors in our research, and I said, "What's going on here?" He said, "I think it's an anxiety attack." He said, let it pass. If it happens again, she was near the end of it by that time. He said, if it happens again, let us know. So now I figure it's resolved. Anxiety, okay, maybe she needs some medication. I'm busy deep in my research, not even thinking that this should apply to my own family, right? Fast forward, it happens again. Second time, my mother calls me and she says, this time your niece fell over. She couldn't breathe and passed out. And we think she broke her leg because she can't walk. She actually hit a table as she came down. And so they said, help us get over here, take her to a clinic. And when they said help us, they knew that my friend was a pediatrician and that I could call him, right? Given that the Canadian healthcare system that you're quite aware of, go to emergency room for a broken leg, it's going to take you 8 hours, right?
Yep.
So I call my pediatrician friend. He tells me where to go. I head over there, hospital, and we did still spend about 6 hours there. Blood tests, X-rays, all this stuff. Doctor comes back and says, seems like an anxiety attack. There's no issue, no broken bone. Blood work is normal. If it happens again, let us know. He said the exact same thing that my friend said. And I realized at that moment that meant if it happens again, she's getting a diagnosis and we're going to tell you what pill she has to take.
Right.
And so I figured I need to now work on this. Drive her home, go back to work. I did nothing. I just like any other busy uncle, father, whatever, I literally went back to work and I forgot.
Yeah. Bad
Sometime later,
uncle.
yeah. And because I was so busy working on healing all these people in our research that I forgot about my own family, right? And so my mother calls me again. This time she's bawling in tears and she says, your niece is not here. And there's a note saying, I can't handle it anymore. I'm leaving. And if you met my niece, she's a sweet, innocent girl that by her own choice doesn't leave home on her own. She always wants mom or grandma to go with her. That's how innocent she is. So running away, completely out of character. So I said, okay, running away from her means she's probably just like outside somewhere. I'll find her. I drive over there. Literally, she's down the street, just standing there and
Mhm.
not knowing what to do. So I pull her in the car and I said, what is it? Is it bullying, boy, like online stuff? Like, tell me what's happening. I'll help you. And I realized she had no idea. She was just running away from that feeling of being in that space. And so it was literally at that moment, I called my office and said, email me her DNA report. I had her DNA report already. And I looked at it and I wasn't looking for what I saw, the symptom of anxiety. I just looked at what are the big red flags in her biology that just don't work. And how could that potentially equal the way she feels? Because it wasn't happening forever. It just happened now, 3 months in a row. I said, wait a second, 3 months in a row? What about her menstrual cycle? So I texted my mom and said, can you tell me what day of her cycle she was on around these episodes? She said, you know what? Like clockwork, you're right. It happened right in the beginning. Okay, clue. So I look at her hormones, and what do I find? Some women make a lot of estrogen. Some women make very little estrogen. Some women make a lot of testosterone. Women make a little. So what we assume men are testosterone, women are estrogen isn't true. There's a lot of variability. She was highly androgen dominant, meaning that she'd made far too much testosterone and didn't make enough estrogen. The beginning of the cycle is when women get rid of all the hormones, the period eliminates it all. So she just went to a much deeper valley because she was already low. So now she goes very, very deep, slim to none when it comes to hormones. But then this problem, she had been cycling for 2 years. Why now? Like, why all of a sudden this anxiety issue? This happened during peak COVID in Toronto in the winter where we had literally the world's longest lockdown,
Yes.
where she hadn't been outside in 5 months. So, another clue, I look at her vitamin D genetics. You need a minimum of 20 minutes of daylight exposure a day to get the vitamin D you need. And if you're not supplementing, it's going to ruin everything. Why? Of the 22,000 genes that make up the human genome, 2,500, more than 10%, require adequate vitamin D to do their jobs. It's the single
Mhm.
most important nutrient in your body. It's actually a hormone, it's not a vitamin.
Well, and let's just like I think that because I've taken I've supplemented vitamin D for 30 years. I mean, it's an inexpensive, and to your point, it is I think everybody should be taking vitamin D. I'm not a
Yep.
doctor, but that's what I believe, and I've done it for many years. And to your point, is people don't understand what vitamin D actually is, which you just stated, which is it is actually a hormone that we need in our bodies, and we often, especially in Canada, don't get enough of it in a natural kind of way. So supplementing it is just making perfect sense. Anyways, I digress on that, but I wanted to point that out.
You're right on, which is people don't understand. We think of it as cold and flu immunity booster.
Yeah.
You don't ask why. Again, 2,500 of 22,000 biological processes need it. So if you take it out, 2,500, 11, 12% of your biological processes fall apart. Hair, skin,
Mhm.
hormones, mood, everything, right? So when you look at the vitamin D genetics, there's a gene called CYP2R1 that takes D2 from the sun and converts it into the active D3 form you need. Then there's a gene called VDPP that takes that activated D3 and transports it to the cell where you actually need it. Then there's a gene called VDR that binds it and gets it into the cell, which is where it starts to work. All three of these genes, she had the worst version. And she was
Wow.
indoors in Toronto in the winter with zero sunlight. So she had a hormone valley. She had this key nutrient which caused all other processes to go into total shock and chaos. But why did it express as a mood and behavior issue? That's the third thing that I looked at. So when I looked at her mood genetics, dopamine is a chemical that allows you to experience pleasure. Eat
Hmm.
some food, achieve something at work, satisfaction, you need a dopamine hit. There's a gene called DRD2 that determines the density of dopamine receptors in your brain. She has the lowest possible density of receptors. So it's very hard to feel the intensity of pleasure. Then there's a gene called COMT, which gets rid of the dopamine. Eventually, you need to get back to your baseline default non reward seeking moment. She had the hyper fast COMT, super fast clearance. So she feels it way down here and it's gone like that, super fast clearance. So she's already teetering on the world sucks. I can't get no satisfaction, which also
Hmm.
equals I'm highly achievement oriented because I'm always seeking reward, right? So it's both. Perfect storm. Hormones, vitamin D, and mood and behavior equaled in this context. Remember, I said context is key of a lockdown, equaled
Hmm.
an anxiety crash on that specific day in her menstrual cycle. So, what would have been an anxiety pill prescription, which she likely still would have been on, it's been a couple of years, instead became I gave her high dose vitamin D, 10,000 IU, but I split it 3 times in the day because she doesn't transport it and bind it effectively. So if she took that
Hmm.
10,000 IU in the morning, she probably only got 2,000 into the cells. So split it into 3 doses. The second thing I did was I got her L-theanine, which is a supplement that's known to boost dopamine levels, and that was it. Literally those 2 things. I did those 2 things. The next month she was fine, and it never happened again.
Wow.
Whereas she would have literally still been on a pill today. Now imagine how many young women, imagine how many mature women are dealing with hormone imbalances, which if I had your DNA, I could tell you this is actually what's going on. It's not the symptom, it's not the anxiety, it's this. Solve the root cause. And not only will this symptom go away, but other things that you don't even know are going on will also go away.
I love that. It's so interesting. I mean, we could talk all day. This is, one of my areas of fascination, and trying to understand. And, you bring up so many great points, Cash, in that when we think about just the evolution of where we are as a society and what's going on, you talk about dopamine and we look at what social media is creating in terms of the constant engagement that we have and many people have. And the dopamine that's being produced and the addiction. Is there such a thing in your world as an addiction to dopamine, given what's happening? And we talk a lot about social media, versus your niece, for example, who whatever doesn't click that button for her. But in general, are you seeing that as an issue as well? I mean, again, it's like the environment that we have kind of evolved into over the years has totally changed, and what's showing up is all of these other symptoms and or illnesses, uh, and I think we have to pay attention to that. But back to the dopamine question, because it's a popular kind of topic, I guess. In my world, I often hear about that dopamine hit to the degree that, events are selling dopamine. It's like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's true. We now understand. Let me give you an example. So when we were doing our work and our research and helping people, we couldn't get people to actually comply and get the work done because it's like, hey, I learned, and then I move on to the next thing. But some
Mm,
people would over comply and do too much and burn out. And we realized that the way they perceive and structure, it's like it's all different based on the neurochemicals of the brain. And so
mm,
I worked with a gentleman named Dr. BJ Fogg. So he runs the Stanford University Behavioral Change Lab. So he's a guru when it comes to implementing human behavior change. And his students who had studied behavior change under his guidance, that understood how dopamine causes people to pursue things. It's not a pleasure chemical in so much as it is a driver motivator. This is why we build crazy things and seek reward and keep progressing. His students built Instagram because they learned how human behavior is a business and how addiction is profitable,
mhm,
right? So they use human behavior change to put people onto a platform where they just can't stop scrolling. And what I've
mm,
learned genetically is there's some people that are wired like my niece that are addicts, meaning that I can't get enough. So I structure my day around it. I use it as a coping mechanism. I use it as a tool. Then there's people that are the opposite, the very high expression of dopamine, a very slow clearance. So they're content. Things are good. I don't need anything. But when they enter the pleasure loop, because the clearance is so slow, they end up binging. They get
mhm,
stuck. It's also a form of abuse, but a very different one. I don't need it, but when I get what I want, I can't stop. Versus I need it and I structure my day around it. I'll
mm,
stop. Another. So even just looking at the word addiction and breaking it up into more precision. There's a gentleman I work with named Charlie Engel who doesn't mind me talking about his story. So he's a New York Times bestselling author about his journey of he went from drug addict in prison to world leading ultra marathon runner. He now runs across deserts and up and down mountains, and this is why he writes books and speaks on stages about it. And so he thought that he was an addict, which is why he had so many drug issues. And I showed him that he's not an addict at all. He's a binger. And he's now doing the binging with his running.
mm,
We all need pleasure and we all need reward, and we cannot live without it. Otherwise, the opposite is depression, right? So in his case, the reward overpowered the pleasure, and you don't need both. The human brain does not need pleasure and reward. It needs a dopamine hit, and it can get it from either source. And the source of reward is far more satisfying for the brain than pleasure is. It's harder to start, but it's also harder to stop. And this is why you'll see high performance people, CEOs, celebrities, athletes, doing the best you could possibly do. When things change, suicide, addiction, substance abuse, it's the other side of their story. Because the same exact neurological pathways lead to both. It's a context question once again.
So when you look at what's going on in the world today, and we, I like to study it. I like to look at health. It's one of those things that's an area of interest to me. When we start to, I mean, you make it so many great points, not the least of which for me that's standing out right now is how much our environments have changed over the years, how we operate. When we consider, the controversy even of vaccines, when you start to look at the escalation with kids. And if you listen to, an RFK Jr., he's going, we don't need most of the vaccines that are being administered to our kids. As a matter of fact, since we've been vaccinating our kids, this and this and this is happening. Now, it's a very controversial topic. I don't know why it's so controversial. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. I think people need to question it. If you're going to be doing that, I don't think you just carte blanche go, yes, that makes sense. In the reality, and of course, those who are pushing the vaccines, most seem to have an agenda behind it at some level, but I won't generalize. Um, Given the controversy of it and what your own research has shown, is that a topic that you can touch on and give
Yeah.
parents
I-
some insights into that?
I've done a lot of work on behavioral development. I've worked with Sick Kids Hospital, Autism Speak, Autism Hope Alliance, and I keep telling them the same thing, that there's no needle in the haystack magic gene that they're going to find to turn it off.
Mm.
Yes, for the real deal of autism, there is a thing called autism which children are born with, but that is a tiny fraction of what we're dealing with today. Why did it go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 36? Not because more kids have autism, because more kids have behavioral development issues due to things like vaccines that cause the same symptoms of they're delayed in their behavior development. So why? So let's use that argument over vaccines, yes or no. And why is there so much controversy? Because both sides of the argument are correct. So
Mhm.
how do we justify either side? Well, the pharmaceutical company is correct that we've tested these molecules, we've tested this medication, it does not cause any problem. And the chemistry doesn't lie. The parents are also correct. That's the day my kid changed. I don't care what you're saying.
Mhm.
They do not behave the same. What happened? Well, when you test and clinically study medication, it's also a context question. You're testing the active molecule. You're not testing all the mercury and aluminum and lead and heavy metals that are in the serum, the adjunct that delivers the active molecule. There's no concern over that stuff. And when you
Mhm.
take the schedule of 86 vaccines that the United States government now has on the schedule for children, and you add up the heavy metals and mercury and aluminum and lead, and you see that it's many, many, many fold over the Environmental Protection Agency's upper limit of what's considered safe. But when you silo and separately suggest each vaccine in comparison to that EPA upper limit, each one stands alone as safe. Add them all together, and you're way far beyond. You can't even see the line anymore. You're so far gone in terms of how you've overdosed these children. So why then 1 in 36, not 100%? Then you have the pharmaceutical argument. If that was true, then all kids would have a problem. Well, not all kids are missing the GSTT1 gene, which is a primary first line of defense to remove aluminums, toxins, and things of that nature. Not all kids have a suboptimal version of the GSTP1 gene, which is also responsible for clearance of these sorts of toxins. The kids that are likely going to suffer from neural inflammation, brain inflammation, from having those heavy metals in their system for too long. Not all kids methylate poorly. So methylation is a genetic process of fighting the fire of inflammation, especially in your neurological system, as we're talking about. So if you have that perfect storm of a kid got all these shots, they have bad glutathione genetics, so they don't detoxify. They have bad methylation genetics, so they don't fight the inflammation. The brain is underdeveloped and it's getting inflamed, leading to literal brain damage. They don't have a disease called autism. They have brain damage,
Mm.
right? And now the good news is, catch it early, you can fix and reverse. We do this with a lot of kids. The longer you wait, the harder it is, and the more it progresses, and you feel like you have this degenerative behavioral development disease called autism, but you don't. You have something else. And the last thing I'll say about this is then you add into the mix that this child that has bad glutathione genetics, bad methylation, and too many insults of heavy metals entering their body, they get a fever, and the medical response is go take some Tylenol.
Yes.
Acetaminophen, which is the active molecule in Tylenol, uses the exact same glutathione pathway to be processed that your body's trying to use to get rid of those heavy metals. So you now add something at the exact time that there's a little bit of hope left to get rid of this stuff and not have the inflammation, that now usurps and uses that pathway, and you have nothing left to fight the heavy metals. And they then, what does your body do with heavy metals? It likes to store it in bone, in fat. Where do you have fat in your brain? Right? So you have this perfect storm. And if you just look at it functionally and practically, the context in which things are actually happening, and this is why context is so key, um, there's no surprise that there's 1 in 36 kids now, right? And it's not a disease per se for most of them. It is literally neurological and brain damage, which can be prevented and reversed if we catch it early enough.
So when we look at what's going on in the world today, I guess, part of what I'm hearing here is that within the context of health and what we have bought into over the years or what we've believed over the years is it's time to have a shift. So in other words, if you've got, I don't know, something chronic and the answer isn't necessarily that this is my genetic predisposition. This is, in fact, I've got this going on. I need to work backwards from what could be happening. So, short of getting, I guess, if they send, get a test result from you, that would open up a whole different door. When they get that test result back, are you then making some kind of recommendations with what they should change, maybe in diet and environment, something to consider? Does it come with recommendations in that regard, Cash?
Yeah, so there's two answers there. Some people get a test with a report with recommendations that are, yes, they are built in the report,
Yeah.
and they go to work on their own. Many
Hmm.
people go through programs where data is dumb unless you know what to ask, right? Insights are what people need, not the data. I don't need a report. What is the typical thinking? I got a report, now someone's got to tell me what it means. Why? Because the data is dumb. Someone with experience has to be able to interpret how that
Mm,
applies to your context. So the majority of people that I work with actually come in the context of programs where we spend days, if not sometimes weeks with them, sometimes months, depending what they're dealing with, to implement those findings and kind of do the job of fast tracking the shift on their biology. Right? Let's quickly make up for lost time and get everything right and come up with your personalized action plan. So that's what most people do, but a lot of people do also just buy a test and report and go through it. It's a budget question, it's a level of concern question, right? What are you actually trying to deal with? So it's both of those.
mhm. So, is there a fundamental, I guess, when it comes back to a lot of what we're dealing with right now? Diet matters. Quit eating processed food. Avoid sugar like the plague.
Yeah,
Is there, you know, get out, get walking, get some sunshine. Those are all kind of, the
yeah,
foundation of good health. And in spite of all that, people continue to have different chronic illnesses. And those are the individuals that, like, if you've cleaned up your diet, if you're paying attention to what's going on in your environment, if you're being aware of the impact of social media and mindless scrolling, maybe that would be an indicator for you. Like, based on what you said, if you've got that going on, you have to look at it and go, what category do I fall into in terms of my own addictions around those kinds of things? And, what is that? Am I a binger? Kind of, is that the self-diagnosis kind of space? But ultimately, it really is about stepping back from it and going, don't look for a reactive pill to fix the problem. Step back and go, what part of it do I have control over that I can change? That is, I guess, ultimately the first step, because regardless of the test, if you come back to me with a test and I see whatever results I see, ultimately I'm going to have to make some changes. I'm going to have to make some changes to that, whatever aspect of my life that is, whether it be diet or exercise or what I'm doing on social media or how I'm living my life. I mean, ultimately it takes a commitment to your health. I mean, that seems quite straightforward. Is that
yeah,
an accurate statement?
yeah. It's a question of you already eat, you already move, you already have relationships. What do they look like that are best for you?
Hmm.
Right? So it's about your habits. Health is from habits. Health is not from reaction. Right? So every single thing you do all day, every day is a choice to walk towards health or away from it. Every
Probably not. I just, because I like to kind of look at different aspects of things, Cash, is that when we look at what you're talking about, when we consider our demographic, when you consider that, let's say, that lower middle or lower income, and then even below that, I mean, this would be probably one reason why, when we look at the health of society in general, it really does become about, in a large degree, there's a lot of it that people are in the environment that they have because financially they can't be outside of that environment. There was a time when eating McDonald's was far cheaper than buying groceries. But ultimately, McDonald's is not a great food source. I mean, let's face it;
yeah.
it's toxic. So, is that a fair statement? Is that what you're seeing in your experience as
So
well? And I mean, and
I
you're in
think
the industry.
yes, we see that, and you'll definitely see that there's more go lower sort of in financial tier, and you'll see an increase in healthcare issues, right?
Mhm.
But what we believe about nutrition and cost, if you have nutrient dense food, you're not eating as much. When you're eating fluff, you're eating a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, a box of pasture raised organic eggs is $8 or $9. And
Yes.
somebody might say, that's a lot of money to spend on eggs. I can buy eggs for $3, right? But eating two eggs is $2. McDonald's is not $2.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a good point.
the choline you're gonna get to build your brain, the protein you're gonna get to fuel your body, the vitamin D, the selenium, the vitamin E, all these nutrients that fuel your body so that you don't need to buy all the expensive supplements,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you really dig in, you'll find that going back to basics, and then we're looking for a level of complexity that nutrition wasn't supposed to be. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
can Uber eat Thai food for breakfast and sushi for dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the level of people are coming and trying to resolve that and saying this doesn't fit my budget. Of course, because no one is supposed to eat with that level of complexity. Our ancestors would farm something, pickle it, store it, and eat the same thing for 6 months, which is why their gut
Mm-hmm.
was so healthy. They would have an animal that they would milk. They would have a chicken that would give them eggs. So if you bring it down to simplicity, the basic staples give us a lot of nutrition and they're not that expensive.
Yeah, I mean, we've even in our own lifestyle over the past 10 years, we're growing a lot of our own food. We're raising our own beef. I mean, we're doing a lot of those things. And when you consider that what we receive in stores, I mean, if you look at the research and understand that even the food sources that we have in terms of fresh fruits or vegetables, if whatever page you're on in that, is that uh, our soils have been so depleted in terms of nutritional value that they actually bring to the plants that even that is lacking. So I mean, the reality of this conversation for me is that the environment is the environment. What can we control? And we can't control a lot of the things that are going on in the world and what's happening again in our agricultural world and processed foods and all of the things that are starting to shape how we eat and what we have to eat. And so it really is about taking responsibility and understanding that you do have control over it. You don't have to be at the effect of certain diseases that seem to be unfolding. There are solutions, and most of them are really, a lot of it's going to be in terms of even what we eat and maybe what we supplement. Um,
Mm.
that would be my kind of recap of it in terms of what we're facing in this world. And I just love the fact that you've done the research that you've done and that you offer at least uh, a glimmer of insight into what we might be facing as an individual because of the tests you're doing. And that is literally, what would we call it, genetic testing or DNA testing? What would you call that, Cash?
Yeah, functional genomics. So genetics is what version of what gene do I have? Functional genomics is the systems in which the body already exists. So it's a unique category under genetics.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and as we start to wind down, and I appreciate all the time that you've given us here today. I just love this conversation so much and what you've shared. Uh, and I'll tell you one of the reasons that is, before I get to my question, is that I actually am in control of my health.
Yeah.
And as much as we want to make excuses for all the things that we make excuses, I made a decision to quit drinking. And and that decision came from a goal I have for, when I'm 70 years old, and that doesn't matter at this point, but a, a credible doctor made a statement. He goes, "We drink because we drink," but he says, "Understand one thing, is alcohol is a toxin. That's it. And the fact that we can get away with it because it is what it is. Our body and our livers process it and da da da. It says, doesn't matter. That's all. If that's what you want to do, that's great. But understand, it's a toxin, and you're actually putting a toxin in your body." And I went, that's a really good point. I don't even know why I drink anyways, and I just quit drinking. So I did it from a social point of view. It hasn't affected my social life one bit.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to sit with a group of people and they can drink their wine or do what they do, and I just don't. That's a
Yeah.
decision for me. But my point is that what you're pointing out here is we have far more control over our health than maybe we've come to believe.
Certainly. And it's the choices you make on a daily basis and priority. Why
Mhm.
why are you making the choice you're making? Because, I need to do what everyone else is doing, have the drink,
Yeah.
right? And here's what's really powerful in what you just did for yourself. And I said this earlier, the satisfaction your brain gets from reward is
Hmm.
far more satisfying than pleasure. So
Hmm.
once you start saying no, once you start saying yes to the right things, and the intention behind your decision is your health as a priority versus what people think or what feels good or what's easy, you
Hmm.
continue to do more of that. And that
Yeah.
in itself becomes addicting. That in itself becomes a source of I can't stop in this path of like I'm always going to choose what's best for me. And
Yeah.
this is why
I
you
love
see,
it.
yeah,
Well,
it's true.
you frame it. You're hitting it right on the head for me because it does. It feels great to be, and I would have to say my moods are better. I don't know. I didn't drink that much, so I can't put my finger on it and say that's it. I just have a much better feeling of well-being, I guess, because of it is what I would determine that to be. And and there's another fundamental is I like to eat, and so I love food. I love good food, and I always look at it going, well, if I'm gonna take in an extra 200 or 300 calories, I want to do it with food that I enjoy rather
Yeah.
than alcohol, which is kind of, yeah, okay, it's nice, but I'd prefer to have some real calories. That's how I
Yeah.
look at it. Pretty
I
simple.
agree. And so I guess to your point, it's like step 1, step 2, step 3 might be challenging, but after that, step 4, 5 are actually rewarding.
Yeah,
And you forget the challenge you got from step 1, 2, and 3, and then the reward becomes more and more satisfying. And so
a
you
hundred
need to
percent.
fight through the first little bit,
Yeah.
and then it becomes who you are. Your identity changes.
Yeah, it is it's such a great you make a really good point. It becomes a thing of identity, and I think that's so important to not just gloss over because it really defines you and it starts to become who you are. And I think it's really important for people to understand that and making those shifts. I do have one question for you, and only because it's been showing up over the past few years more than ever, and that is around migraine headaches. I have come across and I know people that struggle with migraines. Any research on that, just out of curiosity?
That's one of the things that I had to cure myself from. I had
Oh,
debilitating migraines where I would literally be vomiting from the pain because the gut and the brain are connected through the vagus nerve, and I couldn't function, couldn't go to work. So I would say the vast majority of chronic migraines are gut related. So
mhm,
first of all, a headache, your brain can't feel pain. There's something called a dura, which is a membrane in between your skull and your brain, which can shrink or expand based on hydration levels. So hydration is usually the first place to go, and
okay,
salt, good healthy mineral salts in your water with the right level of water. And if you're hydrated, you shouldn't have this variability in dura. But the ongoing migraine is usually your gut. So when the gut
mm,
is in distress, it's sending signals up to the brain through the vagus nerve. Like you said, the gut is the second brain. It literally has brain cells in it, heart that can think. That intuition you feel is a form of thought. It's just
mhm,
not in the form of words. It's in the form of a feeling. And so that's what happened to me. I had leaky gut, I had a damaged gut, and I had crazy intense migraines chronically ongoing for a long time. But I also had eczema. I also had psoriasis, which is an autoimmune form of a skin condition. I also had depression, and I can the list goes on, all related to bad gut health. Right. So this is to something you said earlier. If you're going to work on one thing, go fix your gut.
go
Right.
fix your gut.
It's
Yeah,
very difficult to find somebody that has a chronic disease that doesn't also have a gut issue. It's almost impossible to find someone that doesn't have cardiovascular disease, dementia, diabetes, cancer that doesn't have a gut issue.
wonderful. So, Cash, as we wind down, where and how do people get a hold of you? Let's do a shout out here. I'm already going, okay, I'm looking forward to spitting in that tube. What are we doing?
Well, there's two things I would say. One is on Instagram, I talk about a lot of this stuff, and it's really just me ranting and venting about things that we see in the clinic that people need to know. So it's the Cash Khan official, which I'll share with you, and you can share
Okay.
KASHKHAN official. That's my Instagram. That's also my website. And what I would say there is there's the DNA testing. And if anyone wants to know, there's some programs that are listed on there, but if you want to get more personal, just send an email through the website or message me on Instagram, right?
Mhm.
But if you just want to get the test and start exploring, go to my cashconofficial.com website and the DNA 360 test is there.
Beautiful. It's interesting in that on this particular podcast, The Everyday Millionaire, I often am really interested about the journey of my guests. So, in other words, how did you get here? How the hell did you actually grow up in this environment? Like, what took you on this path, and what got you there? But I've been so into the work that you're doing, so it's all to set you up for. I've got to have you back. We got to do a part two. I want to hear about Kash Khan and how you went on this journey, and as a young man, and going through all of the struggles that you had physically, and becoming the man you are today and the business that you've grown, because I think there's a lot of important story in behind all of that as well, Kash. So I hope I can twist your arm and get you back on the show. This has been absolutely fantastic
Oh,
conversation,
it's
and I
amazing
appreciate it.
talking to you, and we can do that. And I can tell you how my DNA, every single step of that story was inevitable because of my DNA, and it really puts everything
Wow.
together. It's crazy when you actually see it at the personal level, but it's all true.
Okay, folks, you heard it here. Look forward to part two, Kash. I'm going to end with one question that I like to ask all my guests, and that is, what are you grateful for today?
Grateful. Well, I'm grateful that I've learned. So there's this Japanese practice called ikigai, which means sense of
Yes.
purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm doing now. It doesn't feel like work, right?
Mm.
And I'm very grateful that what I do is every time I speak, sell anything, do anything, somebody gets healed, right? And in my
Wow.
religion, we believe that you heal one person, it's like healing all of humanity, right? So that's what I'm grateful for.
So thank you. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation, as I almost always am with my guests. There is an acronym that I came up with many years that is success is simple. And the simple acronym was significantly impact many people's lives every day. And when I come across and somebody goes, well, I don't impact many people's lives. And there's, really, when you think about significantly impact many people's lives, many is a relevant term. It could be one, or it could be 100, or it could be 100,000. But ultimately, when I think about what you're sharing and what you're doing, the impact and the ripple effect of that impact on the health of, the kids and the parents understanding it, and then the lifestyle shift that creates, because through education we learn to change how we operate, and we learn to change our eating habits, we learn to shift and understand how we think about disease, and I always break the word disease down to dis-ease, which really comes back to that mental capacity, emotional, how we handle all of those things. And you did a brilliant job today of shining a light on all of those things. So for you, success is simple. You're living your passion. And I want to say thank you so much again for all that you shared today, and look forward to our next conversation, Kash.
Pleasure. I'm looking forward to part two.